Welcome to the Narrative Summit 2019. Who's here for the first time? A bunch of you. Okay, welcome. For those of you who are veterans, Tom is not around today, so we're all going to introduce ourselves very well. I'm Clara Fernandez-Vara.
I'm Matthew Weiss.
And we are going to introduce you to the Narrative Innovation Showcase. This is the 4th year running that we're doing it. As you come in, please come to the front, make friends, come to the middle, defrag the room a bit so that you can facilitate people coming in a bit later because we might be full. This year we're going to show you all a bunch of new games that we wanted to share with you. And, we have a welcome slide.
Is there something wrong with the slides?
Click on the actual slide.
There you go.
Yeah, it works.
Okay. We already did our introduction.
Yes.
So here we go.
We know who we are.
Okay.
So please remember that you'll receive some evaluations on your email. Please fill them out so that we know how to do. We'll do well today, I hope, but we'll do even better every year. So the goal of this showcase, for those of you who have not seen it before, is to highlight the cutting edge of the practice of narrative design.
Okay, so this year we have a particularly striking collection of games that are very different from each other, including dungeon crawlers, platformers, and even card games. And first up, we have Lost Words by Mark Backler.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Backler, and I'm the founder of Sketchbook Games, and I'm here to talk to you about using words as game mechanics. And this is in terms of our project, Lost Words Beyond the Page, which is an atmospheric puzzler game, half set inside the pages of a diary, and half set in a fantasy world called Astoria. It's about this young girl called Izzy who's aspiring to be a writer, and her gran is helping to mentor her. But when her gran gets ill and has a stroke, Izzy starts to use the fantasy world of Astoria that she's writing about as a means of coping with what's going on in the real world. So let's take a quick look at the trailer so you can see what the game's all about. So, as you can see here, we're running along the words and using them as platforms, but you can also drag them around the screen and use them to solve different puzzles. Also, at some points, to make choices that affect the fantasy world, which we then transition into here. And so, in the Astoria section, you're not walking on the words, but you are using them to interact with the world in different ways. We've also got this word book with you at the top left of the screen there, and that allows you to carry some of the words with you so you can use them at different points throughout the level. So the challenge that we've been looking to overcome has been how to use words as game mechanics to help tell an emotionally moving story, but while also remaining localizable for other languages. There has been other games that have done interesting things with text, including Typo Man, Epistory, Today I Die, Typewriter, and also Letters, a game that's currently in development and is on show at GDC here if you get a chance to check that out. We've tried to tackle the problem in 3 different ways. Firstly, by ensuring that the gameplay and story help serve each other. Then by trying to use metaphors to make the gameplay more powerful and moving. And also by using localization to try and allow as many people as possible to experience the game in their own language. So for us, we've tried to give the gameplay and story equal importance, which sometimes has meant leaving a particular narrative beat on the shelf if we couldn't find the gameplay to fit with it, or sometimes icing a really cool mechanic because it didn't work with the narrative. And while it was a shame to lose those individual parts, it makes the experience stronger and more cohesive as a whole. So here's the most exciting thing that we realized when making the game. Anything that we ask the player to do is something that they will feel, and so therefore it carries meaning. So let's take a look at an example of this. On this level, in one sense, you solve the simple puzzle to turn the words into platforms to get to the tear on the side of the screen there to progress. But there's a real meaning that we're driving at by organizing the level this way. Izzy has aspirations. She's trying to order the future, so players putting the words in place and leading upwards is a way of emphasizing that narrative expression. Here's another example where we see and experience how Izzy is overwriting her memories of the past, and we're making the player responsible for that. They must overwrite these memories by moving across them in order to progress. We're trying to put the player in the same emotional space as Izzy. So here she's worried about her memories of her gran, and we're seeing them replaced with images of her gran sick in her hospital bed. This level actually came about as a bit of an accident I was playing around in Unity with kinematic physics, and then when I jumped on the sentences, they all fell away from underneath me, which really surprised me. And so then when we had the narrative beat of Izzy's gran having her stroke, which is an unexpected moment in the story, we felt that that would actually be a really good fit of this point of the story with that particular mechanic. This narrative beat is about inversion of Izzy's world and the profound confusion that her gran's stroke causes. And the delivery of this beat through gameplay, through the letters falling away, is an eloquent expression of that meaning. Izzy's world is dramatically disrupted. So finally was our localization system. As you can see here, even a single word can be quite a different length in different languages, which poses quite a problem for us in a game when even changing a word by a couple of letters can break a level. So when one of our original programmers started with us, Audrey Profit, one of her first tasks was to come up with a scaling collision box that adjusts automatically based on the length of the text, because we were finding we were spending hours tuning things, and then we would change a couple of words, and you'd have to go back and redo it. So this saved us a lot of time. Another one of the programmers on the team, Khan Bianco, is the one who wrote the smart localization system. So this allows us to make changes on a per language basis. So we can see here that we can switch between the languages on the fly, and you can see some of the different problems we've got of sometimes, like here in Spanish, some of the draggable words are appearing over the text on the page. And then in other languages like German, the 3 draggable words aren't appearing on a single line like they should be, but the system allows us to move all those around and change it per language and then save that out. This is our localization spreadsheet here. So you can see the different languages down the bottom. And if we zoom in, you can see that we use different parentheses to denote different types of words. So the localizers can just move these around, and then the game will automatically pick it up. And so if we needed more or less interactive words in a different language, or they needed to be a different place in the sentence, they can easily do that. So here we've got the square brackets denoting a draggable word, and curly brackets denoting a blue word that's one of our trigger words that causes something to happen when you stand on it. So we can see this system in action here by dragging one of our smart sentence prefabs into the scene, and then you literally just paste the text tag in, and it auto-populates it with all the different types of words. And so that saves us a lot of time, and it makes it a lot more doable for translating the game to lots of different languages, because with it being a word-based game, it makes a big impact for people if they can play it in their own language. To summarize, we've used text in unusual ways to form word-based gameplay through metaphors and careful planning, but with puzzles that can still be translated to different languages. But ours isn't the first or only way of doing this. This slide always takes a little while to load. I think that's going to... There we go. So perhaps you might like to try using gameplay or metaphors or using text to provide an unusual mechanic for your next project. And Lost Words is going to be out later this year. Thanks very much.
Next, yes, is Tiny X Short, talking about Boyfriend Dungeon.
So you might know me as the captain of Kid Fox Games. We recently announced we're also publishing Dwarf Fortress, which is its own narrative innovation I'm not talking about today. Woo. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking about Boyfriend Dungeon. Who here knows about Boyfriend Dungeon? Most of you, but not everybody, so I'm just going to give a very quick overview. It is a dungeon crawler. It's an action RPG where you beat up monsters and take their loot, as you do, trying to get deeper in the dungeon. But then when you find weapons, they turn into beautiful people, and you date them to level them up and make them more powerful. It's great. But the problem is, how do you actually tell this story? How do you tell a story between two genres with very different narratives embedded in their mechanics? Dungeons are about violence, they're about conflict, they're about power. Dating is about intimacy and trust, and we honestly weren't sure, other than putting in some cute people at first, how to make these things work together. There have been many games in the past that have tried a few different things, but we really wanted to have the most aligned story with the underlying mechanics, right? Like that's the dream of a narrative designer. Haha. So first, we tried to do the best practices. We were like, okay, what are our design pillars? So we were like, okay, romance, yes, fantasy, yes, and we thought maybe playful would help bring them together from a philosophical perspective. If it's consensual and safe to experiment and it's quick and surprising, like all of that can kind of blend together romance and the fantasy of becoming more powerful while also becoming more attractive and more confident. And we did feel like we were getting somewhere when we came up. We realized that almost every romance novel has the explicit theme of being stronger together. Like that sounds both like a dungeon kind of theme and a dating kind of theme, right? Like that's great. But what do you actually do with that? Like you have these design pillars, and that's cool. I can review all my scenes and I can review all my dialogue and make sure that my characters are all emphasizing all this theme. But what are the actual mechanics behind this? And so like as a game designer, my first instinct was to take the stuff from one half that you get. Obviously you build power in the dungeon and you build love in the dates. And that's great, and you take them into each other. It didn't actually work that way, and I'm gonna explain why. So the first thing we did was we were looking at how to get money from the dungeons and then spend them on dates. That makes logical sense. Unfortunately, when you try to shoehorn in weird escalating prices. It's not always this bad. Like sometimes it makes a little more sense. But honestly, the idea that when you start dating, it's like, here's $5, and then, okay, I'm not going on date 6 without $300. It does end up a bit strange. Like it doesn't really fit emotionally. So that was a no-go. But then we were thinking, okay, maybe we can take dates into the dungeons. Maybe we can somehow just push them together. And that worked a little bit better. We did end up having little hangouts you can see in our teasers, where if you're running around the dungeon, you'll come across these special points where you can learn a little bit more about the weapon you're wielding. They'll like transform and be like, hey, what's up? The problem is that this doesn't really support full-on dates, because when you're in dungeon mode emotionally, you're like on an adrenaline high, and unless we spent a lot of time working on the pacing of the dungeons to support this, you're just mentally not in the brain space to sit and read a long amount of text. So having little hangouts, as we call them, were great. It had you reminded you that your weapon was a person and they were dating you. But also for the longer dates, that just wasn't going to work. So we still have the main plot dates outside the dungeon when you're like in calm reading mode. So then we're thinking, well, maybe somehow we should figure out a way for your weapons to express themselves even during combat. Thankfully, other games have paved the way for this, so it was kind of easy when looking around to see, okay, like, yeah, your weapon can comment on the different things that you see, whether it's picking up loot or attacking monsters or getting attacked or dying or whatever. Your weapon can be there, and having the different weapons respond in different ways to that. Like some of the weapons are a little more nurturing, some of them are a little more edgy. Yeah, sorry. It's hard to resist. So yeah, that was great. We call them dungeon comments, and they're pretty high bang for buck there. And then we started thinking, how do we do it the other way? How do we shove the dungeons into the dating? Like, well, maybe you find new characters in the dungeon. Like, yep, you find weapons, they turn into people. That works great. Okay, cool. That's great. But what if dialogue choices gave you combat stats? That would make sense, right? Like maybe when someone flirts with you, it's like if you aggressively flirt back, you get attack points. And if you are a little bit shy, you get defense points. And if you're funny, you get luck points. All of that is very on theme, like you're getting stronger together. It's great. The problem is that whether or not you show, so we started out by showing the stats, that you would definitely get an attack by doing this, you'd definitely get a defense by doing this. And the problem is that at best, people felt conflicted. They think, well, what I really want to do is flirt back, but I really need some more defense. And you'd think that would be an interesting decision. It's actually just a difficult decision. And there is a difference, because not all difficult decisions are interesting. So for example, to make this less explicit conflict, we tried hiding the stats. Our consultant, Christine Love, predicted this would result in actually more frustration, because what would happen is people would play through, find out what stat they got, and be like, screw you guys, I'm doing that again because I need a defense point, thank you very much. And they'd in fact be compelled to replay it. And I doubted her very briefly and did one playtest and never again. So we removed all the combat stats, and essentially the problem was that by providing an extrinsic arbitrary reward, we were absolutely undermining the value of the intrinsic reward. When you want to flirt with someone, you don't want the game telling you to think about something else. The intrinsic pleasure of flirting with a cute dagger is untouchable, like you shouldn't be messing with that with your +1 attack and your +1 defense. That is only as valuable as the game says it is, and you feel a little bit helpless when the extrinsic rewards are in your face. So we took that out. You do actually still get some points, like if you're dating the dagger, generally you'll get one kind of point, and if you're dating this other weapon, you'll generally get a different kind of point, but by divorcing it from the individual dialogue choices, it feels a lot more meaningful, that you are getting stronger together, but not because you're saying one thing or saying a different thing, it's because you're spending time. And then maybe the easiest one of all was trying to think of, well, how do you improve combat through intimacy? And that is every plot point with a different weapon, you get to love rank up, and you choose your skill tree, and that's great. You definitely get stronger together that way. So that was great. And what we learned through all of these patterns was rather than taking the power from dungeons and using them in dating and using love from dating in dungeons, it's actually the opposite. The power comes from dating and the love comes from dungeons. So what ends up happening is that while you're playing one half of the game, one genre of the game, you are always thinking about the other half, and it unites them mentally and emotionally. It was infinitely more satisfying. So then we had a final problem to solve, which is the marketing evil side of what if we make this game and nobody wants it? Originally, Boyfriend Dungeon was actually about astrological signs. We designed characters that would be paired, and our audience on Steam who liked dungeon crawlers and dating sims seemed to want something else. This was March 2017, and they all seem to have something in common. It's worth noting mobile games are much healthier in this respect, but we fundamentally had a crisis of how do we make random Steam gamer number 5 less alienated by him? I mean, even they're not actively sexualized all the time, but they're still pretty sexy. And we have some lovely women, but they're also, pure diversity was not going to solve the problem because at the end of the day, they are not this, right? But we did turn up a few exceptions. There were a few oddball dating sims that were selling equally well, if not better. And at the end of the day, we found that people were just less ready to be alienated if they were laughing. And in fact, they didn't even see this as a deceptive trick. They're willing to engage in something as a joke. And if it's sufficiently entertaining, they'll actually stay a little bit more open-minded. So what we do is we take the discomfort and you add in a little bit of absurdity, and it's a little bit of a judo throw of somebody who's on the defensive. So we intentionally made the premise more absurd. We were like, astrological signs, not silly enough. And so when the idea of weapons turning into people was there, yes, that is the way. Because when they're laughing, then we have them. So that's our main strategy and how to make our hybrid work, even on a sometimes contentious platform like Steam. Wish us luck. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. Okay, next up is Alan Turner talking about When Rivers Were Trails.
Yeah.
Milamia, Haumatakiapi, Hiani Alan Turner, Malakota, Namasapa, Jante Washtea, Nape, Chia Jape. Introduce myself in Lakota to you all and address any of my relatives who are out there to say thank you for being here and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm here by request of my relative Elizabeth Lapensee to talk about a game that she designed and directed, funded by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation with the assistance of myself as a game designer and writer, and with the assistance of a multitude of native writers and voices. The game is an ecology of narratives about a fictional character surviving a real-world event. Its form takes inspiration from the Oregon Trail. How many of you are familiar with the Oregon Trail? Yay, okay. And where the water tastes like wine. Anybody familiar with this? So our result is a game called When Rivers Were Trails. And we had a big challenge ahead of us because this is a game about a Native experience, right? It's a game about, is anyone here familiar with the Allotment Act? No? Okay, so the Allotment Act was a thing that happened in 1887, also called the Dawes Act. And what it basically did was it took a bunch of reservation lands and reallotted that land, saying some of this we're giving back to Native peoples, and other parts of it we're going to open up to settlers to come in and like reclaim this thing and do all this agricultural stuff. We're going to let the natives be agricultural. Everyone's going to be happy. It didn't work out that way. What we wound up having was a bunch of, oh, it moved. A bunch of settlers who were coming into Native territories, and they were basically chasing natives off, killing the natives off, taking that land. There are processes by which if a Native person died in certain ways, then that land can be moved over to a non-Native person. So we wanted to share that experience because it's something you don't hear about in history books, but it's something that was a very real experience for Anishinaabe people in the area. So this is the game. Is this the, okay. And so you can see the obvious relationship with where the water tastes like wine. And then we have lots of these little mini games, and these are survival mini games, or hunting mini games, or fishing mini games, or travel mini games. But they're all being seen from the point of view of the character playing. So for instance, with fishing and hunting, you can't fish and hunt all day long, right? You have a limited amount of resources, but you actually aren't there to kind of fill your gullet with as much stuff as you can. You're there to kind of work towards what's necessary for your own survival. This is also a free game that's available on itch.io that anyone can download, and is oriented towards an educational market. So our big challenge with When Rivers Were Trails was how can a game with indigenous themes how can a game with indigenous themes include culturally informed narrative game design? That is, how do we make a game about natives for natives that helps you feel like you're experiencing things through a native lens, as opposed to what normally happens. This challenge, there's a representational issue, right? Typically, what you get when you get natives in games, or you get a game about native peoples, is you get something like this, right? We get characters like Nightwolf, Tala, Turok, all of which are someone saying, hey, we included a native person, there's a native character in this game, it's awesome, look how cool they are, look how hot she is, look how hot he is, everyone's hyper-masculine, hyper-sexualized. But they have this problem that they fulfill colonizer stereotypes and colonizer fantasies about what native peoples are, as opposed to speaking at all towards the native experience. So what we wanted to have is that a game where when you engage with a native person, you're actually engaging with a native person, right? So this has to be a meaningful interaction with the character, where you're learning something about them as people, not only in terms of like what their tribe is, but how they exist in the world, how they exist in relation to the other people around them. So there's this process that we built up, which is all about listening, gifting, and helping. That is, you meet someone, and culturally, the inclination is somehow or another to share and be thankful for that interaction. So these are some screens that show this in process. So one of the first things you'll notice in these is that we're using language in everything that we do. So when you meet a character, that character is speaking to you in Anishinaabe. And there are some places where you meet people who are Lakota, some Cree, and a few other different tribal groups, and you're greeted by them in their language, and they talk to you on and off in their language and in English. And there's no, sometimes we translate it, and sometimes we don't, just to get people in the habit of actually trying to verbalize and internalize some of that language experience. So there's also this process where the choices you are engaging are relevant to the community, so that it's not just you walking up with a big inventory of stuff, right? Your inventory doesn't matter. What it's about is that you're managing abundance. You come into a space, and there are people you're engaging with. They lack abundance, you have abundance, and you give some of your abundance to them. And it's not about the particulars of it, right? It's not about I have X number of these things, and I'm going to give you X number of these things. And so, and then once you have done whatever gifting to them, there's typically a gifting back. And one of the things we want to include is this idea that we want to recognize a person's story as part of their abundance. So sometimes it's not just giving them food or giving them medicine, it's also giving them information about where you've been, who you are, what your family is, who you're related to, because sometimes the information is entertaining. Sometimes that information is educational. They're letting them know what's coming, letting them know if there's Indian agents in the area, letting them know what animals you've come across. So speaking of animals, we had a secondary challenge here in that this is a game of, like I said, narrative ecologies, but ecologies also, natural ecologies matter in this. You are, as a person, someone who's been, your life has been disrupted by an invasive species, right? There's another group that's come in and it's just completely terrorizing how your world works, and you're moving out and you're engaging with other species and you're causing disruptions yourself. So we wanted to include indigenous science in this process. So it's not just talking to people, it's also engaging nature. But there's just like the issue of representation I talked about before, there's a second issue of when people think of indigenous peoples and they think of nature, this thing happens where folks start to anthropomorphize the characters, and it becomes all about these spirit relationships. And I have people come to me and say stuff like, I was going down the road and a crow came and landed on the road in front of me. What does that mean, Alan? You're native. I'm like, that means that you're walking down the road and a crow was going somewhere and it stopped, and it could care less about you. So to kind of break this idea of like we're all kind of hanging out, in the forest, hugging raccoons, singing songs, everything's happy. We wanted to create an educational experience that kind of didn't allow for that. So what we wound up with was this space where animals are being communicated with and honored. In the same way that we dealt with humans, we're dealing with animals that way. Everything is situational, and there wasn't ever really a right way to engage with things. But what we did not want was for animals to be talking heads. We didn't want them to be stereotypes. We didn't want to go back in the old tropes. So the kind of interactions we created allowed for this interesting range. One thing that we're doing is making sure you're having encounters with animals that aren't around anymore. So these are some bighorn sheep. The old bighorn sheep, which were hunted and roamed in the area, were wiped out towards the end of the 1800s and replaced by other bighorn sheep that were brought in from Europe. So what we have now isn't the same, aren't the same animals that were there. Also, there's this idea that sometimes you would observe and listen, sometimes you would help the animals, sometimes you would hinder, and it wasn't obvious what the right choice was in that situation. Your engagement with nature fit back into a resource called well-being, which is about your relationship with your ecology in much the same way that honor with humans is about your relationship with that social ecology. Sometimes the things you came across were funny moments that were there. They're kind of an emotional salve for like all the terrible stuff that's happening along the way. And sometimes they were just somber and distressing moments that showed you how so many things are being displaced and how unforgiving nature is. So the biggest solution that we came across in trying to solve all of these problems was to engage indigenous voices. So the Indian Land 10-Year Foundation, which is an amalgamation of tribal groups on the West Coast, funded this. But what we did was we reached out to indigenous peoples and got them to participate in storytelling that populated the work. We sought writers who were from the affected areas and tribes, explaining the narrative boundaries and invited them to write from experience of self, family, and tribe. More importantly, this collaboration was to result in something meant to give back and better the overall experience of Native kids in school. We weren't mining the communities for something we could make a profit on. We were collaborating with something that would help us share our knowings and help us to be more seen in the world around us. So thank you.
Next, we have Strix Beltran, who's going to talk about Bluebeard's Bride.
Just make an adjustment here. I have many more notes than as usual. I want them bigger, like that. Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first talk of the day. This is my first Narrative Summit talk ever, so I'm very excited to share this with you. Yeah. So just a quick content warning. This talk includes discussion of violence to women, so you are aware. So good morning, folks. My name is Strix. I'm an award-winning narrative designer for both analog and video games. And I'm currently a project narrative director at Hidden Path Entertainment in Seattle. I'm a trained mythologist, and the focus of my master's degree was on the intersection between mythology, psychology, and play. It's fascinating stuff. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Bluebeard's Bride and harnessing the power of Jungian depth psychology to make really awesome games. Just curious, does anyone here know about Bluebeard's Bride? Okay, there's some people. Awesome. You play D&D too, I know it. Okay, so what is Bluebeard's Bride? Bluebeard's Bride is a game that I co-designed with two other women, Sarah Richardson and Marissa Kelly. We developed it over the course of 2 years and took it to Kickstarter with a $5,000 funding goal. The Kickstarter raised $130,000. The game went on to be nominated for a handful of awards and came away with Indiecade's Grand Jury Prize in 2018, as well as winning the IGDN's Best Art category and Game of the Year, so we're very proud. So Bluebeard's Bride is a feminine horror tabletop role-playing game based off of the original fairy tale of a young woman who marries a mysterious man with a string of missing wives who came before her. It's a game for 5 players and a facilitator, and it takes about 4 to 6 hours to play. It's a one-shot, meaning that the game ends in a single session, and you can replay it again for a very different feel and outcomes by choosing different characters and moves. So here's the catch. The players all play the same person, the bride. Now, if you're familiar with the tale of Bluebeard, you know that the marriage is doomed. Bluebeard sets up a psychological trap for his new wife by saying she can go into any room in the castle that she wants, save one, and when she does, he murders her and sticks her in a closet. So, each of these players play a character that is an aspect of the bride's psyche. We call them sisters, but if you are familiar with Jungian depth psychology, you'll recognize them as complexes, and we'll talk about those in a minute. So together they explore Bluebeard's castle, trying to decide if he's a good guy or if the bride should try to get out of there. And at the end, they're invariably drawn to a confrontation where the final room, and spoilers, nothing good happens. So the challenge. In a game of feminine horror where all the players inhabit the same body, how do we empower them to embrace each other, and what scares them most? The challenge is actually a really big one, because this is not a game about defeating the horror. There is no defeating the horror. This is a game about leaning into being scared, being vulnerable, and trying to survive when you have no power. So how do we accomplish this with the people of various genders sitting around the table, some of whom are going to take to this like fish to water, and others who maybe have no lived experiences to access? And most importantly, how do we make this fun? So archetypes, and more importantly, complexes. Because of my training, we were able to apply a deep mastery of archetypes and Jungian psychology to narrative design to get us to a place that works. Hopefully most of you are familiar with archetypes, but I'll give you the rundown anyway. Archetypes are personality patterns that our minds recognize almost universally. They're the composites, the pathways to understanding loaded with an entire culture's interpretation and knowledge of a certain way of being. Archetypes are recognizable roles in our social world: the mother, the sage, the lover, and so on. You should think of archetypes like a zip file your brain can read unconsciously. Even if you specifically don't know what it means to be a mother, engaging with the mother archetype unfolds an understanding for you that is also relatable to everyone around you. In games, archetypes are a means of transferring vast quantities of information to players without overburdening them. For Bluebeard's Bride, we used our expertise to burrow down a layer deeper than simple archetypes. Archetypes can also represent pieces of a single person. Within us all is an array of archetypes of varying strengths and qualities. The archetypes themselves remain pure en route, but there's layers of lived experiences that kind of stick to them, kind of like gum on a shoe. And that's what a complex is. So on top of the mother archetype, you've got maybe the mother martyr, who is the mother who's like, I do everything for you, why don't you love me? Some of you have experienced that, right? And these complexes are kind of with you throughout your life, for better or worse. They are inherently imperfect. If you've ever had an argument with yourself in your own head, think of it as your complexes having a go at each other. For Bluebeard's Bride, we picked some of the archetypes and attached complexes most relevant to women as the basis for each of our characters: the mother, the virgin, the witch, the femme fatale, and the animus. So let's take a brief look at Jung's structure of self, I know it looks really scary, as a helpful starting place for archetypal work. This diagram is Jung's map of the psyche. At the top is the outer world. Our persona and ego are closest to the surface. Then we move down and you see the shadow and the inner world. Those are the unconscious or only semi-conscious parts of ourselves. You'll notice that the self contains the whole of all of these things. In Bluebeard's Bride, the sisters have to fluidly navigate both the inner world of the bride's mind and the outer world of the castle. We specifically built mechanics into the game to accomplish this. You can throw in as many paragraphs of exposition or dialogue as you want at a player, but it won't stick unless a player has a way to engage or embody it directly. We built specific mechanics around bringing a sister to the forefront, the persona. This is the role that operates with and around the outer world. A sister gets to occupy the bride's persona and use an extra set of moves oriented towards the outer world if she possesses a wedding ring that passes around the table. Only one sister can have the ring at a time. So as an example, the virgin currently possesses the ring. So she's able to call on a castle servant for help. The interaction goes badly, though, as the servant tries to seduce the virgin. Overwhelmed, the virgin gives up the ring to the femme fatale, and she takes over while the virgin withdraws from the sticky mess that she got the bride into. Likewise, there are mechanics built around sublimating a sister into the shadow, a place of exile deep within the psyche. If a sister becomes too wounded, she shatters. And becoming a terrible, disoriented version of herself, she's no longer to make any of the moves she could before. She can only help the facilitator antagonize the other sisters until the end of the game, which, by the way, is really fun. Again, giving players access to archetypes and complexes through our mechanics was key to making our game work. To get players to engage at the deep level of complexes, right, not just archetypes, we gave each sister 3 faces to choose from. So if we're thinking about it structurally, a sister is an archetype, and the face is a complex. At the start of the game, each player chooses which sister to play, and then 1 face on the sister's character sheet. The face is an extra move that they can use throughout the game to reinforce the theme of their complex. In the example we're looking at here, the mother has 3 faces: the bear, the kingmaker, and the martyr. Each is a specific flavor of the mother archetype, and each with its own hang-ups. The bear protects one sister at the cost of injuring another. The kingmaker heals herself by giving her power over to men. The martyr hurts herself double in return for healing another sister. So an example of this in play would be, a player has chosen the mother and decides to go with the martyr face. During play, a horror sets itself upon the witch, about to injure her grievously. The mother steps in and uses the martyr move to protect the witch, but gets twice as hurt in return and shatters. Poof. Like a mother, she wanted to protect her own, but caustically and in an unsustainable way that wasn't even asked for. Now she's shattered. She's a pale, lost image of herself, forever wailing at the witch and the others that she was such a good mother. She'd do anything for her babies. Why don't they appreciate her? We took pains to ensure that each face was a recognizable extension of the archetype. To wrap up, we deployed archetypes and their accompanying complexes as character structures and play mechanics to evoke a specific experience: feminine horror. We used archetypes as shorthand to convey to players complex character information and build pathways for players to more authentically occupy certain modes of being. This leads to a deep shared emotional experience for players that keeps them coming back for more. There are many ways you can adapt this approach to your own work. You can treat your ensemble cast like an extension of your main character. Think of them as complexes turned outward. So again, going beyond the original archetype into a complex. This will create a cohesive cast that balances out each other, spurs organic action, and naturally draws out character growth over the course of the game. Bring an archetype or complex to life by making it into an actual mechanic, and build awareness for your main character and how they're moving between their inner and outer worlds. How would that change gameplay? And finally, explore what archetypes and groupings of archetypes feel novel, new, and fresh. There's no reason to tread the same ground. You can make an innovative, cutting-edge game by exploring archetypes that have not historically been engaged with in games. If you'd like to check the game out, you can find it at our publisher's website listed here. You can find me on the web or on my site. I'm on Twitter. I'm going to put a link on Twitter for a download of these slides, and they have extra notes and links to articles and resources. So check it out. Thanks for your time today.
Okay, finally we have Dave Gilbert talking about Unavowed.
I was going to ask if some of you had played it, but I guess that answers my question. How do I do this? Here we go. Okay, so hello, my name is Dave Gilbert. I am the founder, creative director at Wadjet Games. We've been around since 2006 and specialize in narrative-heavy adventure-type games. We're known for Shiva, the Blackwell series, Gemini Rue, Primordia, Technobabylon, Shardlight, and others that I'm sure I'm forgetting offhand. But today, I'm here to talk about Unavowed, and for those of you who have not played it, here is a quick trailer, which isn't coming up. Just click it. There it goes.
These are dangerous times. Dark forces are coming. We are not dealing with a mindless spirit bent on chaos and destruction. Time is closing in around us. I can only hope we are not too late. We stand against chaos, sworn to protect the innocent from those who would do them harm. We're a team, the wall against the darkness, the protectors of the mundane world. Supernatural threats have risen, and for the first time in decades, we need to fill our ranks to fight. Use the skills of your chosen team members to help you defeat those who work in the shadows. I think your definition of impossible is about to change. Welcome to the Unavowed.
Thank you. No. Okay. So the quick elevator pitch is that it's an urban fantasy adventure game with the narrative structure of a party-based RPG, which is a boring and unsexy way of saying that I basically cribbing the old BioWare style from like the mid-2000s. It's basically the old-style BioWare RPG narrative structure, but without the combat. You progress through the game via a series of missions, and for each mission, you have a pool of characters that you can join you on your adventure, and you can choose 2 of them at any time out of a pool of these 4. So this gameplay mechanic will be familiar, obviously, to anyone who played Knights of the Old Republic or Dragon Age or Mass Effect. But instead of changing your tactics in combat situations, they change how you solve puzzles and get through obstacles and problems in the game world. So the challenge here in creating this game was to keep the focus entirely on these 4 characters. They were the draw. We needed to keep the focus on them. Every part of every mission needed to reinforce the relationship between you and them and with each other. And in order to do this, I really needed to have a very concrete understanding of who these characters were, and not just in terms of their backstory and things like that, but I needed to approach it from what I call a high and low level perspective. And by high level, I mean the overall feel, the feeling I want you to get from these characters, their personalities, their backstories, the filter that they see the world through. Why won't you go? Oh, I can use the arrow keys, awesome. This is Mandana, for example. She is a Jinn swordswoman who is several centuries old. She sees the world through a filter of what used to be there. She will look at a street corner. This game takes place in New York. She'll look at a street corner and remember a tree she used to climb that was there 200 years ago, or what supernatural creatures existed that do not anymore. This guy, his name is Eli. He is a mage who came into his power very late in life. He had to leave his family and career behind, so he tends to look at the world through what he's lost and what he used to be. Logan is a spirit medium who can talk to ghosts. He is a recovering addict, so he tends to look at the world through, he tends to look at everything in relation to how it can either help or hurt his recovery. And this is Vicky. She's a disgraced police officer from a large cop family, and she typically divides the world into law-abiders and criminals, very black and white. So I'm obviously paraphrasing. There's more to these characters than that. But these are the broad experiences and point of views that each character brings to the various conversations and interactions that they have with you. Various NPCs, and each other. I wanted to make you feel like you were hanging out with friends and getting to know them. And that's all well and good, but that's just a story. So I needed to also approach it from a low-level perspective. And by that, I mean the nitty-gritty details. What do these characters actually do from a gameplay perspective? How do they help you solve problems and help you progress through the game? I knew that every mission would play out slightly differently depending on who you brought with you, and every character needed to bring something different to the table. I really wanted each combination to be unique and interesting. So Mandana here is the agile and athletic one who can climb to places that none of the other characters can, like this ledge. Eli can set stuff on fire and has the power to read or look at anything that was consumed by a flame. Vicky is a former cop, knows every police officer in the city, can get information she wouldn't get otherwise, or that you wouldn't get otherwise. And Logan, being a spirit medium, can talk to ghosts. So if you see a ghost in any scene, he can talk to that ghost and you can get more information that way. If you don't have Logan, the ghost just kind of wails at you. So my intent here was for these 2 tiers, the high and low level, to kind of work together in tandem to make every character combination unique and fun and interesting experience. But at the same time, I wanted you to see the potential alternate paths that you could have taken. If you didn't bring Vicky and you see a police officer, you might think, oh, if I brought Vicky, I could talk to that cop and things would play out a little differently. And overall, I think I did a good job with this. Not every player loved every character. But there were no characters that were universally loved by everyone or hated by everyone. And the game was very specifically designed so you can pick and choose your favorites. For example, if you see a high ledge and Mandana's not there, you might wonder if she could have gotten up there. The hope being that you'd want to replay the game and see what would happen if you took another character combination. Theoretically. What I did not expect was that the players, when the players saw a ghost and they did not have Logan, they got very frustrated and very annoyed. If they saw this ledge and didn't have Mandana, they didn't care so much. They knew that there were other paths, but they really wanted to talk to that ghost. And so what ended up happening was they inevitably brought Logan with them on every mission thereafter. So he was the probably most chosen character of them all, so, you're welcome, Logan. So the main lesson that I learned from all this is that it's very important to have a high-level design goal. Mine was that I wanted you to like these characters. So every low-level design decision I made was in support of that high-level goal. And without that, I would have been lost in the weeds. This gave me the direction and focus that I really needed to get through this project and get it done. Otherwise, I would have gotten very overwhelmed with all the alternate paths and everything. So this really helped keep me focused, that high-level goal of that. This is what I want the game to feel like, and this is what I want people to get from it. So I'm going to focus on that. And whenever I was lost, I would just have to remember that, and that would kind of steer me back to where I needed to be. Anyway, I'm going to close with a bit of a plug. Unavowed has been nominated for an IGF award this year in the category, thank you, in the category of excellence in narrative. So if you're interested in seeing more or playing a bit of the game, you can check it out on the show floor later in the week. Thank you very much.
All right, so we had quite a big variety of games. I think that this may be the one session where you could hear about, Pocahontas and Jung, and you can see a Unity editor screen too. So now we're going to give you a few takeaways. What are the kinds of things that we've learned from all these very, very varied games that we saw today? So the first one has to do with role-playing games, kind of piggybacking on what Dave was just talking about. Can we have role-playing game elements without combat? Well, yeah, of course. RPGs have many mechanics beyond fighting. We can create and maintain relationships. We can have morality systems. We have resource management. We have character growth, just to name a few. Stats can also be used in expressive ways beyond how strong or dexterous your character is. We can also use stats to keep track of how the player relates with other characters in the world of our game. There's a great wealth of human, dramatic, and emotional mechanics players are already familiar with through RPGs. There are many different ways in which to interact with the world beyond attacking it, destroying it, and trying to prevail.
And it's important to remember that even the smallest things are storytelling. So the simplest classic mechanics can be leveraged for any kind of story you want to tell. Recontextualizing everyday mechanics can be incredibly meaningful. So the simple act of moving a character up and down in a platformer can be a rich metaphor that dramatizes emotional experience. An action as simple as lying to someone can have staggering impact. Casual conversations between NPCs can help you get to know them better and know how they'll behave in certain situations. If you use your tools cleverly, it can have it can have the same epic consequence of a boss fight, but for cheaper dev cost.
Also, do your homework. Just because we are familiar with basic strategies of storytelling doesn't make us into experts on every single topic out there. And just going to the Wikipedia article is not research. Just, the world is bigger than Wikipedia. Wikipedia is pretty cool, but that's only the starting point. So, do things like going to a library. They exist. They're there in the world. If you're writing about a place and you can afford it, try to visit it. Meet the people there. If you are writing about a culture, talk to people belonging to that culture directly. That's good to ask, or hire them as consultants if you can afford it, or even writers, please. That's how we bring diversity into games. Carelessly applied story elements, especially those that are drawn from deep cultural traditions, can make your game boring and derivative at best, and toxic and stereotypical at worst.
And of course, embrace being a smuggler. So audiences will be open to new things if you're willing to meet them halfway, but that doesn't mean you have to compromise your values. So using humor to disarm people and endear them can strengthen, not undercut, the subject matter of your story, because in addition to sort of getting people on board, it also makes characters feel more human and real. And resorting to the conventions of genres like urban fantasy or platformers can help us connect with audiences, but also give them tough decisions to make and intimate stories that touch them.
And that's all on our part. Thank you very much for coming. We're not going to have Q&A. We don't have enough time, but we'll all meet you at the wrap-up room down the hall if you have any questions and you want to follow up with any of the speakers or ourselves. Thanks again.